to another video. In the previous video, I discussed the difference between logical and emotional intelligence. But now I'm going to do an in-depth analysis at how these different intelligences make you a good man. And I'll be speaking to men specifically at this particular point and not analyzing women in that nature. In the understanding of man, I can only speak of it based on the man's perspective, which is based off of a man's experience. Which means if we were to now see a difference in approach in the psychology, we can actively see that if we approach a man's mental state from a female perspective, we might see it might not necessarily resonate the same, and to the same degree we could say that from a man's perspective we may not resonate with the female perspective either. In the understanding of the mind now, I will be speaking regarding what it means to be a good man. If you are of a female audience and wish to simply understand the nature of a good man, then I would invite you to come along the ride. But in the understanding of the good man, it is based off of the stimulus, once again, of emotional or logical intelligence. In the understanding of the story between a different polar opposite, you could say, emotional and logical, you could now see also the rise of the bad boy and good man states. In understanding a bad boy, you will see that a bad boy arises the emotional stimulus of the woman, which if a woman was to fall in love, how do you make a woman fall in love? You have to stimulate her emotional intelligence, something that drives her emotions towards you. And in the act of the bad boy is also the prancing of the feathers, you could say, showing off, acting out of emotion, seeking a mate. And in the act of the emotional stimulus, we then see that women are more drawn to the emotional intelligence of a man. But in understanding the emotional intelligence of a man, we must also see that the more emotionally intelligent a man is, the more unstable in their expression of emotion they are, which as a result means they themselves have a negative thought process. They are not self-aware. And understanding that now a bad boy is an individual that is not self-aware, because that is what allows them to act that particular way. They don't have a self-conscience based on that particular behavior. Because they're not self-aware of that particular behavior, they continue to act in that particular pattern, resulting in female attraction. What makes a good man is through hardships of life, there is a arc of sorts where you see now the perspective change and the focal point has once again deepened. In the process of taking a non-self-aware individual, you then enter the self-awareness of the good man, where in the self-awareness process, the logical perspective of things, you then see that if a man approaches the world from a logical perspective, he is of a more understanding nature. And because of being of a more understanding nature, he might not have the same competitiveness in his approach to essentially prance his feathers around, because he has gotten to a point he has faced hardship causing that perspective or focal point change in his life. And through the perspective of the good man, we would now see that the good man, if a person or a young man evolves into a good man too early on in life, you will see then the beginning of the frustration of said young good man. Because in being a young good man, you would see your inability now that yes, the frustration, it's tough to find a mate when you are young and are already of good nature as a young good man. But in being a young good man, you also have faith that there is patience. And in your approach of life, you also know that there is a time when there is also an arc in the woman, which means now you see two potential partners in life, logical and emotional. And according to the ones you wish to invite in your life, you will see your life go in the direction you invite the partner of, but you as a man are the driving force of that ride. And so how do you rebalance if you are now of too good of a nature as a young good man? Well, this is where you begin seeing the introduction of substances. A liquid courage of sorts. It allows you to pull away from the focal point of that perspective of logic, where you may re-enter a more emotional stance. You re-enter a competitive aspect. The problem now is if you were to look at it from the perspective that if you introduce a substance in order to seek a form of love, but now if you remove that form of love, you will now see that the seeking of that form of love with the substance aspect of things now remains present, which means if you are introduced to that substance to gain your liquid courage, well then you will find that in the love being taken away and now you feeling that substance gives you love, as a good man you could then be corrupted into the addiction of said substance, which then returns you back further and further and further and further and further back more into a bad boy at that point. But look at the success rate of your life. The moment you then further back into the good man, you see a change in your partnership or partner options, which is of a slightly more logical stance in a woman. But in understanding that polar opposites attract, the problem now is in understanding being a good man and you having gone through this pain for the amount of time that you have, because you might suffer alone for a period of time as a good young man. But now comes the point where a woman has her character arc, and through the amount of time she has denied you, known as being in the friend zone, for being such a good young good man. In being in the friend zone, the women that had put you in the friend zone because they saw you were of such good nature, they were essentially just afraid that you were too good for them. They weren't ready for that. But But now you see their character arc, and you arrive now a few, maybe more years down the road than you expected. And now you see that the previous female friends you would have been friend zoned by are now coming around and saying, hey, I'm all of a sudden interested in you. But in the depth of the dive of the arc of the good man, you also see that in the aloneness of the good man, a good man then sees that in himself, in his own peace, he also found comfort. And in that comfort was the understanding of his frustration. And in the understanding of his frustration, he began understanding that it was the partner itself that wasn't the initial partner that they initially wanted. Because now he arrives at the conclusion that when she presents herself in front of him, at the point she says, hey, I'm interested after all these years of rejecting you, the young good man evolved into a now more fearsome good man, a lion, would see that in the control of himself, in his logic, he doesn't see that partner as fit in his option. Because if she was truly fit, she would have seen it back then. And so the question itself, is the person fit as a partner, then narrows down, and you begin seeing in the idea of choosing partners, you don't want your next partner to be worse than the previous one. You want your next partner to be better than the previous one. And if you have a negative pattern and the downward spiral beyond that point, you are actively chasing the bad boy lifestyle once again. But in the understanding of the good man, you would see that good men are actually people that have extreme amounts of emotional pain, frustrations. Based on these frustrations, they created a reflective pattern in order to understand themselves, resulting in them becoming what is known as gentle. The problem as a person that is gentle, it lacks excitement. And woman likes excitement, woman likes thrills. Because if not, you're not thrilling, why do I want to go with you? You see this perspective now. And being a young good man, you have to learn to, once again, learn what it means to be a creator. Which in order to be a creator, it is not solely good, but it is also negative to the aspect of life. There's both good and evil to the knowledge of God. It is not that God is blind to the evil, it's that he chooses to be inherently good, so that the world only knows inherently good. But you can still invoke a little devil in you from time to time. Nothing wrong with that. And in this notion, we then see where the mothering of the good young man stems from. If a mother is overprotective of the young good man, she may stunt his ability or overstimulate his maturing into a good young man. And based on too early of a development, he will then develop this frustration of this lonely experience as a result of being too good of a young man. But in the beauty of the too good of a young man, you also have to have faith in the good young man. Which means you have to let him live his life. And the moment you let him step into the world a little bit on his own, little by little by little, you will see that he finds himself. And in finding himself is when he finds the same level of love that he would initially see if he did not experience the frustration he would feel towards his mother. A good young man typically has a slight level of frustration towards a mother figure, which is a result in order to understand his frustration towards the mother figure. He begins understanding the woman herself, that which created him. And in understanding the woman herself, he then understands other women themselves. And in understanding other women themselves, it creates a gentle nature. Because man, once he becomes gentle, is essentially as a result of realizing woman has been hurt. So where does a good young man go from this point? Well, in the analysis, you could dive as far as you want to. You could blame woman, you could blame woman, you could blame woman, you could blame woman all you want. But that is the point of the initial incident of the fruit. Because it is then woman that is blamed for the entirety of time. Because you experienced a substance which then resulted in now a separation in the courage you could have developed if you had just waited a little bit younger. Or longer, excuse me. And now in the young person development, we can actively see that we have to actually change our understanding regarding substance use in young people. Some substances benefit the opposing force that which bring out what an individual needs to actually experience in life, which is the opposing level of intelligence. The problem now is in the opposing form of intelligence, we then feel another level of confidence, and once again deepening in the focal length of reflectiveness of the perspectiveness. The addiction, the further you dive into the mind, you realize that the mind itself is a slippery slope. And in understanding the nature of a good man, as a good man, you just have to realize things just are the way they are. And one day you will get the girl. But you've just realized that in order to get a good woman, you must now find someone that is slightly purer. Someone that hasn't been corrupted by other walks of man. And in this notion, we then see why some men choose to then find a younger partner. Because in the maturity aspect of the good young man, you might say that in the overdevelopment of maturity into a good young man is also an underdevelopment in its ability to be a bad boy. But in the ability to be a bad boy, you have to essentially realize that a bad boy has to do what a bad boy has to do. And if a bad boy does what he has to do in order to assure the survival of his family, all of a sudden, as a good young man, you might see that there is times you might have to invoke evil to assure the survival of your survivability of your family. And if that means the survivability of your family all of a sudden means you need to be a little bit more bad boy, so you might get a girlfriend, so you can assure the survivability of your family. Well, then guess what? You're gonna have to start getting fit. You're gonna have to start getting yourself into a discipline that gives you a mojo, where you see now you step into a more alpha-like mentality. The understanding of an alpha is the evolution of a good man into a more complete man. And an alpha, in essence, at the fundamental psychological analysis of what the definition of what it means to be an alpha is an individual that does not experience fear or anxiety. At the base fundamental nature of what it means to be an alpha, it means an individual in the pack that does not experience fear or anxiety, which gives it the ability to go forth beyond and lead the rest, because he is then he who travels, meanwhile the rest stay behind. He is the explorer beforehand. He is the hunter now. He who goes pardon me. Ooh. He is he who goes beyond into the next of the world in order to essentially say, this is where the direction leads. It is up to you if you wish to go there. And now you see in the rise of the story of Christ, an alpha that specifically said, in the exploration of the direction we are to go, this is the direction. If you wish to go there, it is now entirely up to you. And now you see the evolution of the good man, a more complete man, which means you have to learn to be what is known as the universal force, both good and evil as a man, because that is what it means to be a good man. When a man has figured out how to tame the monster. Thank you.